"You're lucky we let your daughter sit at the main table." That's what he said, cousins. He said it while my daughter stood in the middle of a country club ballroom in Charleston, South Carolina, wearing the ivory satin ribbon my late wife had sewn into her bouquet by hand before she died. He said it loud enough for the bridesmaids to hear, loud enough for the servers to stop pouring tea, loud enough for the photographer to lower his camera like even he knew something ugly had just entered the room. Then he reached out, took that bouquet from my daughter's hands, pulled the ribbon loose, and dropped it into a silver ice bucket beside the champagne, like it was trash. My daughter didn't move. She just stared at that ribbon sinking into the ice water, the last little piece of her mother she had carried into that room, and her fiancé, the man who was supposed to become her husband in less than 24 hours, stood 3 feet away and said nothing. Not one word. The man who did it was her future father-in-law, Preston Vale, a man with his name on hospital wings, charity boards, and half the plaques in that city. He wore power like a tailored jacket, smooth and expensive. And from the first time he looked at me, I knew exactly what he saw. An old widower from inland Tennessee, a retired county clerk with a used pickup truck. A man who had spent his life behind counters, stamping forms, filing records, saying yes ma'am and no sir. A man not worth fearing. Preston Vale thought that because I spoke softly, I had lived softly. He thought because I wore a plain gray suit and drove 7 hours in a truck with duct tape on the passenger mirror, I had no reach, no memory, no one who would answer when I called. He was wrong. I watched that ribbon disappear under the melting ice. I watched my daughter's mouth tremble once before she pressed it still. I watched her fiancé study the carpet like cowardice had become a pattern in the floor. Then I buttoned my jacket, walked out through the side doors of that ballroom, and made one phone call. One call that Preston Vale had spent 18 years praying nobody would ever make. My name is Ellis Mercer. I am 67 years old, and I live outside Johnson City, Tennessee, in a white house with a tin roof that sounds like applause when the rain comes hard. The porch rail leans a little to the left. The mailbox has been hit twice by teenagers taking that curve too fast. I still mow my own grass, not because I have to prove anything, but because I like straight lines and the smell of cut clover. I was married for 39 years to a woman named June, who could make a church basement full of people go quiet just by standing at the piano. She died 6 years ago from a cancer that was polite enough at first to let us pretend we had time, then cruel enough to take that lie away in pieces. Our only child is named Clara. Clara is 34, a pediatric physical therapist, the kind of woman who can get a frightened 6-year-old to try walking again by pretending the parallel bars are a pirate ship. She has her mother's patience, my stubbornness, and a habit of forgiving people 1 inch too far. When she called to tell me she was engaged to a man named Bennett Vale, I did what fathers do when their daughters are grown. I listened for the thing beneath the words. She sounded happy. Not perfect happy, not careless happy, but hopeful. And hope, when your child has had enough grief, can make you lower your guard even when your bones tell you not to. Bennett was polite the first time I met him. Polite enough to seem good if you were tired of looking too closely. He shook my hand with both of his. He asked about June. He helped clear plates after dinner. He called me Mr. Mercer even after I told him Ellis was fine, but I noticed things. I noticed that when Clara spoke, he often smiled before she finished, like he had already decided the shape of her thought. I noticed that when his phone buzzed, his shoulders tightened before he looked at the screen. I noticed that he said, "Dad thinks more often than a grown man should." Still, I held my tongue. That is a hard thing to learn, family. Harder than most people think. There is a season when your child needs your hand, and there is a season when they need your respect. Get those seasons mixed up, and you can love somebody right out of trusting you. So I watched. Preston Vale entered our lives the way men like him enter every room, as if the room had been waiting for him to arrive. He was 70, though he would never have admitted to a day past 62. He had silver hair, a sharp chin, and the warm public voice of a man who had practiced sounding generous in front of microphones. In Charleston, his family name opened doors before he touched them. Vale Children's Center, Vale Surgical Pavilion, Vale Foundation for Youth Wellness, Vale this, Vale that, Vale everywhere. People called him a philanthropist. I have lived long enough to know that word can mean a generous man, It can also mean a man who wants his fingerprints on every good deed in town. The first time Preston met me, he looked at my shoes before he looked at my face. They were polished, but they were old. Good leather, resoled twice. June bought them for me the Christmas Clara was 12. I wore them because they were comfortable, and because a man ought to take care of what still serves him. Preston asked what I had done for a living. I told him I had worked in county records for 31 years. He gave me that soft little smile rich men give when they think they have located your ceiling. Honest work, he said. I have heard those two words used as praise. That was not how he used them. He turned to Clara and said Charleston would be quite a change from Tennessee, but that Bennett would help her adjust to a different pace of life, a better network, a higher circle. He said all of it with cream in his voice and vinegar underneath. Clara glanced at me, just once. When she was little, she used to squeeze my thumb when she was scared in public. At that dinner, across the table, she tapped her water glass twice with one finger. It meant the same thing. Please don't. So I didn't. I went back to my salmon. I asked Preston's wife about her garden. I listened to Bennett talk about commercial real estate as if buildings were living creatures and people were just furniture you put inside them. And I told myself, maybe I was just an old man who missed his wife and distrusted anyone who might take his daughter farther away from home. The engagement weekend was held at a private country club outside Charleston, the kind of place where the grass looks too obedient and even the trees seem managed. Preston insisted on paying for everything. He said it was his gift to the couple. Clara told me privately that she and Bennett had wanted something smaller, but Preston said the Vale family did not do small. I drove down Thursday morning with my suit hanging in the back seat and June's ribbon tucked in a small cedar box beside me. That ribbon was pale blue, from the dress June wore, and June took her dancing for our 10th anniversary. Years later, when Clara was 16 and already talking about the kind of wedding she might someday have, June folded that ribbon and said, "When the day comes, tie this around your flowers. That way I'll get to walk with you." Near the end, when June's hands had grown thin and the piano at church had gone silent, she asked me if I remembered where she put it. I told her I did. She said, "Don't let her forget." I said, "I won't." So when Clara asked for it, I brought it. The rehearsal itself went smoothly. Clara looked nervous but beautiful, standing in the aisle beneath white flowers that cost more than my first car. Bennett looked handsome and pale. Every time Preston spoke, Bennett straightened like a boy called before a principal. That should have told me enough. The dinner afterward was in the club's largest private ballroom. Long windows, crystal lights, white tablecloths, silver place cards, 3 forks I had no intention of using correctly. There were maybe 40 people. Clara's friends, Bennett's cousins, Preston's business associates, charity board members, and a few people nobody introduced, because in Preston's world, some people were decoration. I sat near the middle beside my younger brother, Ray, who had driven from Knoxville and promised me twice he would behave. "Don't look at me like that," he whispered when Preston began his welcome toast. "I know how to act around rich fools." "No, you don't," I said. He smiled into his tea. For the first half hour, the room behaved. There were stories about Clara and Bennett. A bridesmaid talked about Clara staying late with patients even when nobody paid her overtime. Bennett's college friend told a joke that landed well enough. Preston stood at the head table, smiling like he had commissioned the happiness himself. Then he began to speak. At first, it sounded like a toast. He spoke about family legacy, about building something that outlived you, about the responsibilities that came with the Vale name. He said Bennett was stepping into a new chapter, and Clara was stepping into one too. Then his eyes found me. He said marriage did not only join two people. It joined histories, habits, expectations. He said some families understood stewardship naturally, while others had to learn it after the fact. He said he admired simple backgrounds because they produced gratitude. Ray's hand tightened around his fork. I rested 2 fingers on his wrist. Preston kept going. He said Clara had a good heart. He said children loved her, which was fitting because she had such a gentle little profession. Then he gave a small laugh and said he supposed not everyone needed to be ambitious and that there was beauty in useful work. The room shifted. Not much. Just enough. A woman near the windows looked down. One of Bennett's groomsmen took a long drink. Clara sat very still. Bennett smiled weakly at his father. That smile did something to me. It wasn't agreement. Exactly. It was permission. The kind, weak people give strong people when they are hoping the cruelty will pass over them and land somewhere else. Preston lifted his glass and said, "To Clara, may she learn quickly what it means to become part of a family that does not settle for ordinary." Nobody clapped right away. Then one person did, and the room followed because rooms are cowardly things when enough people inside them are afraid of one man. Clara's hand moved toward her bouquet. She had tied June's ribbon around the stems herself before dinner. I saw her thumb pass over the blue fabric. She was steadying herself with her mother. Preston saw it too. He stepped down from the head table, with his glass still in his hand, smiling that public smile. "What's this little thing?" he asked. Clara looked up. It was my mother's. "How sweet." He said sweet like it was something sticky on his fingers. "She wanted it with me tomorrow," Clara said. Preston tilted his head. "Tomorrow is a veil wedding, my dear. Everything photographed will represent both families." He reached for the ribbon. Clara pulled the bouquet slightly toward herself. Not much, just a small instinctive motion. Preston's smile thinned. "Now, Clara," he said, still soft enough for politeness, loud enough for punishment. "Sentiment is lovely and private, but we don't need every little piece of the past tied to the front of the future." Bennett said, "Dad." One word. Not stop, not don't. Just Dad, like he was warning the weather to be gentle. Preston ignored him. He took the bouquet from Clara's hands. His fingers were steady. "That is what I remember most. Not drunk, not careless. Steady." He pulled the ribbon loose, looked at it for half a second, and dropped it into the ice bucket beside the champagne stand. The blue disappeared under cubes and water. Then he said, "You're lucky we let your daughter sit at the main table." The silence that followed was not empty. It was full of decisions people were failing to make. Clara's face went white. Not crying white. Worse. The color of a person who has just learned something they cannot unlearn. I looked at Bennett. He opened his mouth once and closed it. "Cousins, I want to tell you something true about anger. Real anger is not always hot. Sometimes it is so cold you can feel your own heartbeat slow down to make room for it. I have a temper. Ask my brother. Ask the men who used to come into the county office and scream at clerks half their size because a deed search did not go their way. I have had to hold that temper on a leash most of my adult life. In that ballroom, the leash burned through my palm. But I did not yell. I stood up slowly. I walked to the ice bucket. I reached in and took out June's ribbon. It was wet and wrinkled and colder than a living thing should be. I folded it once, then twice, and placed it in my breast pocket. Then I turned to my daughter. "Come here, sweetheart," I said. She came to me like she was walking through deep water. I put one hand on her shoulder and spoke low enough that only she could hear. "Go with Uncle Ray to the ladies' lounge. Ask one of your bridesmaids to come. Take a breath. You don't have to decide anything in this room." Her eyes searched mine. "Daddy," she whispered. "I'm here," I said. "I'm not moving." Ray was already standing. For all his jokes, my brother has always known when to become stone. He took Clara gently by the elbow and led her toward the side hall. One bridesmaid followed, then another. I faced Preston Vale. He was still smiling, but something behind the smile had gone watchful. I said, "I want to make sure I understand what happened." He laughed lightly. "Ellis, don't turn a sweet moment into a rural courtroom." A few people gave nervous little sounds that were not laughter. I said, "You took my late wife's ribbon from my daughter's bouquet, dropped it in an ice bucket, and told her she was lucky to sit at the main table." His jaw moved. "It was a harmless gesture," he said. "You people attach drama to everything. You people." There it was, plain at last. I looked at Bennett again. He stared at me with panic in his eyes. Not shame, panic. Like I was the problem now, because I had named what his father had done. I said to him, "Son, this is the part where a man decides what kind of husband he plans to be." Bennett swallowed. Preston turned toward him, and Bennett looked down. That was answer enough. I nodded once. "All right," I said. Then I walked out through the side doors. The hallway outside the ballroom was cool and quiet. There were oil paintings of men on horses, men with shotguns, men standing on land they probably did not know how to work. At the far end, through a window, I could see the parking lot and my old Ford under a live oak, looking about as welcome as a mule at a yacht club. I took out my phone and called a woman named Marisol Vega. To understand why, I need to tell you what Preston Vale did not know. Yes, I spent 31 years in county records. That much was true. But a county records office is not just stamps and file cabinets. It is where people's lives go to become permanent if nobody is paying attention. Deeds, liens, easements, guardianship filings, property transfers, shell companies, backdated signatures, families stealing from widows, developers leaning on old farmers, nursing facilities hiding ownership through 3 layers of paperwork so nobody knows who to sue when something goes wrong. For the last 11 years before I retired, I worked as records liaison to a state elder fraud task force. I was not a lawyer. I was not an agent. I did not carry a badge. I was the man who knew where the paper was buried and which signature did not look like the others. Marisol had been an assistant attorney general then, sharp as broken glass, decent as morning bread. She used to say I could smell a fraudulent transfer through a locked cabinet. She answered on the 3rd ring. Ellis Mercer, she said. Either somebody died or somebody lied. Maybe both, I said. Her voice changed. What happened? I gave her the short version. Preston Vale, Charleston, hospital charities, real estate around pediatric clinics, my daughter marrying into the family tomorrow. There was a silence. Not long, long enough. Then Marisol said, "Are you alone?" "Yes. Do not discuss this in that building with anyone. Do you understand me?" "I do." She exhaled once. "That name has crossed my desk." I closed my eyes. "How bad?" "I can't tell you that, Marisol. Ellis." We sat there in the old discipline of people who know lines exist for a reason. Finally, she said, "If your daughter is about to become legally or financially connected to anyone in that family, she needs independent counsel before she signs a single document. Prenup, trust, property waiver, foundation, paperwork, anything. Especially anything connected to the Vale Foundation or the clinics." My hand tightened around the phone. "Clinics? I can't tell you more tonight, but there is more. There is enough that you needed to make this call." I looked back toward the ballroom doors. Behind them, music had started again, too loud and too cheerful. Marisol said, "Can you get her out of there?" "I can get her into a quiet room." "Then do that." "And Ellis?" "Yes? If Preston Vale learns you called me, he will not apologize. He will move." I figured. "No," she said. "You need to understand. Men like him don't just protect reputations. They protect systems." When the call ended, I stood there for a moment and looked at June's wet ribbon in my pocket. Water had soaked through the fabric of my shirt. It felt like a cold hand against my heart. I found Clara in a sitting room near the powder room. She was on a little green sofa, her bridesmaids around her like a wall. Ray stood near the door with his arms crossed. The moment she saw me, she stood. "Is Mom's ribbon okay?" she asked. That was my daughter. Humiliated in front of 40 people, and the first thing she asked about was a piece of cloth. I took it from my pocket and placed it in her hands. "It'll dry," I said. "Your mother made stronger things than ribbon." Her chin trembled. This time she let it. I asked the bridesmaids to give us a minute. Ray stayed because Clara asked him to. I sat beside her and told her the truth in pieces, because truth given all at once can feel like another attack. I told her I had made a call. I told her Preston's name was known in legal circles. I told her I did not know all the facts yet, and I would not pretend I did. Then I asked her a question. "Has Bennett or his father asked you to sign anything?" She looked away. That look aged me 5 years. "What?" I asked. "Bennett said there were standard papers," she said. "Just family office things, a confidentiality agreement, something about foundation events, and a prenup, but he said it was just to make his father comfortable." Ray muttered something I won't repeat in front of decent people. I kept my voice even. "Did you sign?" "No. Tomorrow morning. Before the ceremony. Preston's attorney is coming at 9. I looked at the carpet. Little blue flowers woven into cream. I remember that because when your world shifts, the mind sometimes grabs useless details to stay upright. "Clara," I said, "you are not signing anything tomorrow morning." She stared at me. "I'm supposed to get married tomorrow." "I know. Daddy. I know." She pressed both hands to her face. Why didn't Bennett tell me this was serious? I did not answer quickly. A father has to be careful not to hate a man faster than his daughter is ready to. So I said, maybe because he doesn't know how serious it is. Maybe because he knows and doesn't want to. Both can hurt you. She looked at Ray. He said, softer than I expected, baby girl, a man who lets his father throw your mama's memory into an ice bucket is not confused. He's trained. Clara closed her eyes. In that moment, I did not want revenge. Not first. What I wanted was to put my daughter in my truck and drive until the country club disappeared behind us. But she was 34, not 14. My job was not to carry her life out of the fire without asking. My job was to show her where the exits were. I said, you get to decide what happens tomorrow. But you will decide with your eyes open. She nodded slowly. Then she said, I need to talk to Bennett. I'll be right outside. No, she said. Stay close, but not in the room. That was fair. Bennett came 10 minutes later. He looked like a man walking into a doctor's office for results he already feared. Clara asked everyone to leave except one bridesmaid, Hannah, who had been her best friend since college. I stood in the hallway with Ray and watched through the half-open door, only because Clara left it that way. I could not hear every word. I heard enough. She asked Bennett why he said nothing. He said, you know how Dad gets. She asked about the papers. He said, they're standard. She asked what was in them. He said, I didn't read all of it. She asked whether the wedding was about them or about his father's control. He said nothing for so long that even Ray stopped breathing loudly. Then Bennett said, if we just get through tomorrow, it'll calm down. Clara stood then. My daughter, who had spent years coaxing injured children through pain, looked at the man she had planned to marry, and finally stopped trying to rehabilitate what was broken in him. No, she said. It won't. The wedding did not happen the next day. That is the part some people think should have been the ending. Daughter sees truth, wedding canceled, father drives her home, villain embarrassed, clean, satisfying. Easy. But life rarely ends at the emotionally convenient point. Preston Vale did not become powerful by accepting humiliation quietly. By sunrise, he had turned the story. He told guests Clara had suffered a breakdown. He told Bennett's relatives my family had attempted to extort him. He told the club manager there had been a misunderstanding caused by emotional instability. By 8:30, his attorney arrived anyway. By 9, Preston had requested a private meeting with me. I agreed. Not because I owed him one, but because sometimes a man shows you more when he thinks the door is closed. We met in a small library off the main lobby. Dark shelves, leather chairs, no books that looked read. Preston stood by the fireplace, with his hands in his pockets. His lawyer sat with a folder across his knees. Preston did not offer me a seat. I took one anyway. He looked at my old shoes again. That almost made me smile. Mr. Mercer, he said, last night was unfortunate. Yes, I said, it was. I am prepared to overlook your family's theatrics. That's generous. His eyes hardened. My son is devastated. Your daughter has embarrassed 2 families. My daughter was insulted in front of a room and asked not to sign documents she hadn't read. His lawyer shifted slightly. Preston noticed. You are out of your depth, Preston said. I nodded. People keep telling me that. He stepped closer. Let me make this simple. Clara will issue a statement saying the wedding is postponed due to stress. She will not mention me, my family, the foundation, or any documents. In return, I will not pursue damages for the deposits, the travel expenses, or reputational harm. I looked at the lawyer. Is that your advice too? The man did not answer. Preston smiled. I don't know what you think you accomplished by calling whoever you called last night, but you should be careful. Old men with small pensions should not start wars they cannot afford. There it was. The threat, polished and placed on the table. I stood. For the first time, I let him see that my softness had been a choice. Mr. Vale, I said, I spent 3 decades watching men put threats in nicer envelopes than that. They all thought paper made it clean. His smile faded. I continued. My daughter will not sign your statement. She will not sign your confidentiality agreement. She will not sign your prenup. Explorer. And if any member of your family or staff describes her as unstable again, you will hear from an attorney who enjoys discovery more than I enjoy sweet tea. His lawyer looked down at the folder. Preston's face flushed. You have no idea who you're speaking to. No, I said. You don't. I walked out before he could answer. 3 days later, Clara and I met with an attorney Marisol recommended in Charleston, a woman named Ruth Bellamy who wore red reading glasses and had the calmest angry voice I had ever heard. She reviewed the documents Preston had wanted Clara to sign. The confidentiality agreement was not standard. It was a muzzle. The foundation paperwork named Clara as a volunteer ambassador for a pediatric rehabilitation initiative attached to a New Vale clinic network. It included language that could have placed her near patient outreach records and donor communications she had never seen. The prenup included a clause waiving claims connected to any family-controlled charitable entities. Ruth read that clause twice. Then she removed her glasses. Miss Mercer, she said, someone wanted you close enough to be useful and bound tight enough to be silent. Clara sat very still. I had seen that stillness before, the night before. But this time it was different. This was not shock. This was a woman becoming clear. Over the next month, things moved quietly at first. Marisol could not share details with me, and I did not ask her to cross lines. But Ruth began sending preservation letters. Hannah, the bridesmaid, gave a sworn statement about what Preston had done with June's ribbon and what he had said. The photographer, bless that nervous young man, had not taken pictures during the worst moment, but his camera had been recording short video clips for behind-the-scenes footage. He had Preston's hand on the bouquet. He had the ribbon hitting the ice. He had the words, "You're lucky we let your daughter sit at the main table." Cousins, never underestimate the power of a man being cruel while someone else's camera is blinking red. 2 months after the canceled wedding, the state attorney general's office filed a civil action against several Vale-controlled entities. The allegations were not small. Misuse of restricted charitable donations, inflated construction invoices, patient referral incentives hidden as outreach grants, elderly donors pressured into changing charitable commitments through misleading documents. The Vale Foundation released a statement calling the claims baseless. Preston appeared on local news with his sad philanthropist face and said his life's work was being attacked by opportunists. Then Ruth released a brief statement on Clara's behalf. It did not mention revenge. It did not mention money. It said only that Clara had declined to sign documents connected to the Vale Foundation after becoming concerned about their scope, and that she would cooperate with any lawful inquiry. That was all. It was enough. Within a week, 3 former Foundation employees contacted investigators. One of them had kept copies of internal emails. Another had records of donor complaints that had never been reported to the board. A third remembered me from the country club and called Ruth because, as she put it, I saw what he did to your daughter, and I realized he probably did it to all of us in different ways. That sentence stayed with me. Bullies are rarely creative. They just change costumes. Bennett came to see Clara in Tennessee in late October. She agreed to meet him on my porch because public enough and private enough are sometimes the same place in small towns. I stayed inside, washing a coffee mug that did not need washing. Through the screen door, I heard his voice break. He told her he was sorry. He said he should have stopped his father. He said he had spent his whole life trying to survive Preston's approval, and he had confused survival with love. Clara listened. Then she said, I believe you're sorry, but I needed a partner, not another patient. I closed my eyes at the sink. There are moments when your child says something so true you can feel the last piece of childhood fall away from them. Bennett left before sunset. Clara cried afterward, not because she wanted him back, because grief is not a vote. It comes even when the decision was right. I sat beside her on the porch swing, and for a while neither of us spoke. Finally she said, I feel stupid. No, I said. I should have seen it. You saw what you were ready to see when you were ready to see it. She leaned her head on my shoulder, like she had when she was little. Do you think Mom would be disappointed? I took June's ribbon from my shirt pocket. I had started carrying it there without thinking. It had dried with faint wrinkles, but the color remained. No, I said. Your mother loved courage, especially the kind that shakes. The case against Preston did not explode all at once. It cracked, then widened. Board members resigned. Donors asked for audits. A children's clinic project was paused. A judge froze several foundation accounts after investigators showed restricted funds moving through consulting contracts tied to Preston's private development company. And then came the hearing. It was not the final trial. Not even close. Just a public injunction hearing in Charleston. Ruth thought Clara should attend if she felt strong enough, because Preston's attorneys had suggested in filings that Clara's concerns were the product of family resentment and emotional distress. My daughter read that sentence 3 times. Then she said, "I'm going." We sat in the second row. I wore my old gray suit, the same polished shoes, and June's ribbon folded in my pocket. Clara wore navy blue, and no jewelry, except her mother's small pearl earrings. Preston walked in with 2 attorneys and the posture of a man who still believed rooms belonged to him. Then he saw us. Family, I wish I could hand you that moment. Not because it was loud. It wasn't. His step simply missed its rhythm. Half a beat, maybe less. His eyes went to Clara, then to me, then to my breast pocket, where the edge of that blue ribbon showed just enough. For the first time since I had known him, Preston Vale looked uncertain. Not ruined. Not yet. But aware. Aware that the old man in the cheap suit had not disappeared. Aware that the woman he tried to shame had not stayed silent. Aware that the little ribbon he dropped into ice had become a thread leading people back through everything he had tied shut. During the hearing, Ruth played the video from the country club. Preston's own voice filled the courtroom. "You're lucky we let your daughter sit at the main table." Nobody moved. The judge watched it twice. Preston's attorney argued relevance. Ruth stood and said the clip showed a pattern of coercion, intimidation, and attempts to control Clara's legal participation before the wedding. The judge allowed it. I looked at Clara. She was crying, but she did not look away. That mattered. 16 months later, Preston Vale entered a settlement in the civil case and, separately, pleaded guilty to 2 counts connected to charitable funds and false statements in financial disclosures. He did not get the rest of his life in prison. Stories are cleaner than courts. But he got 4 years, house forfeitures tied to the scheme, and a permanent ban from managing charitable organizations in the state. The Vale name came down from 1 clinic. Not all of them, but one was enough for me. Bennett was not charged. He testified in a related proceeding and left Charleston soon after. Clara heard from him once, a letter forwarded through Ruth. She read it alone and burned it in our fire pit without telling me what it said. That was her right. As for me, I went back to my little house with the leaning porch rail and the mailbox that still needs replacing. On Tuesdays, I volunteer at the county archive teaching young clerks how to read old deeds and never trust a signature that looks too careful. On Sundays, Clara comes by when she can. Sometimes we talk about her mother. Sometimes we sit with coffee and don't talk at all. June's ribbon is framed now in a small shadow box by Clara's front door. Not because it survived the insult, because Clara did. And here's what I learned, brothers and sisters, if you have stayed with me this long. The richest man in the room is not always the powerful one. Sometimes he is just the man who has spent the most money making sure nobody notices what he is afraid of. The quiet person at the table may not be weak. They may be measuring. They may be waiting. They may be giving the people they love one last chance to show who they are before the truth does it for them. And when someone you love is being humiliated, there is a choice every soul in that room has to make. You can look down at the carpet and hope the cruelty passes. You can calculate what it will cost you to speak. Or you can reach into the ice, take back what never belonged to the bully, and stand there long enough for everyone to understand that dignity is not something rich men get to grant. If you think I did right by staying calm, getting my daughter out, and making that call, instead of swinging at an old tyrant in a country club ballroom, comment 1. If you think I should have confronted Preston right there in front of everybody and made him apologize before he took another breath, comment 2. If you think I should have stayed out of it and let Clara handle the whole thing herself, comment 3. And tell me where you are watching from, family. Tell me what time it is in your city. I read these comments more than you might think. Most of all, tell me this. When someone you loved was being diminished in front of you, did you stay quiet? Did you do the math? Or did you reach for what had been thrown away? Sometimes the strongest love is not a shout in the middle of the room, but a steady hand that helps someone step out of humiliation and see clearly again. Protecting family means honoring their choices, telling the truth with kindness, and standing close when they feel shaken. Even a bruised ribbon can become a reminder that dignity can be rescued, dried, and carried forward.